Good morning, folks. So here we are. It is Tuesday, and today we're starting our human impact part of ecology. We've already talked about the basics, about how ecologies work, the interactions and the interdependencies, whether it's through some form of symbiosis, like mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism, whether it's looking at something like a predator prey relationship. Then we took a look at how do different populations compete with one another and try to limit competition because competition hurts. Regardless of what animal you are, you don't want to compete any more than you have to for the resources that you require. Now we're going to get into the effects of the most dominant species on this planet, human beings. And what we really want to pay attention to is how they've affected the natural systems that were already in place long before we existed. And how have we pushed things? Now, before I get started on this, I do want to clarify something. And this is going to sound kind of weird to you guys. Try not to blame the older generations for the state of this planet as it is handed off to you. And the reason I say that is because up until the late 70s, the concept that was largely taught in schools from science teachers like myself, the belief was at the time that Earth was so large and so vast and it was so complex that quite literally we were taught as human beings, not me specifically, but human beings were taught that we could not affect it. Like you were taught in school that it doesn't matter what we do. Earth is so unbelievably huge, it will take care of itself. The idea that it can't take care of itself and that instead we need to take action to take care of it is actually a pretty new idea. And if you go back to generations that were even born in the like 50s and 60s, they might not have gotten that message until after they were out of school. So some people will have listened to it and other ones will not have. So I just want to point out like the understanding and the science of the time said Earth was too big to have an effect. So try not to judge people too harshly if they made poor decisions. If you don't have all the information, I mean, you probably don't want yourself to be taken, your judgments to be judged then if you don't have all the information either. Something to consider. But let us move on. So today we're starting to get into our human impact. And this is really a big one because we're finding out more and more we have affected the world. And we've affected the world in no uncertain terms. So what I'm going to do is we're gonna kind of going to go over like just a baseline with a series of examples. And then we will day by day do a little bit of a deeper dive into those to better explain them, to be able to really talk about how they influence things. So, it's important to note that our alterations and our effect on this planet is going to be felt in two different forms. We're not only going to have our local, but then we also have to look into the global level of the entire planet and how that ties into it, how that affects it. What you're looking at here is a wastewater treatment plant. And each one of those gigantic pools that you see is for one form or another of sanitation. So the sewage and the refuse is pumped into one pool and it's allowed to sit there and kind of work on it itself for a little bit before it's moved to the next. There, a new process happens, then to the next, etc., over and over and over again, until finally the water as it is cleaned is pumped back into either the municipal water supply or out into a river, a lake, or a stream. So you can see the river right along the bottom here. And you would find that this refuse water, after use and cleaning, is probably being discharged right around here, into that water supply. This is how we handle things. And This process, in terms of sewage, is actually very, very good. We do phenomenal work. But we're finding other things that also go into this that our treatment plants were never designed to handle. For instance, medication. Now, you guys may not realize this, but when you take medication for something that sits around in your body identifies it as a toxin, as something that's dangerous, and your body is constantly working to get rid of it, which is why you need to keep taking it. Well, every time we use the bathroom, we are flushing some of those toxins out. Those toxins enter into our wastewater, they go to treatment plants like this, but this plant is not designed to break down things like acetaminophen, the active pain reliever in Tylenol. And so acetaminophen can go from basin to basin to basin through all the different treatments here and then get pumped right out into the water, completely unchanged. And so now you have a bunch of animals and life in the water that has to deal with this new drug that they have not encountered before. And we're finding very large scale issues due to that. There's things like slashing and burning for agriculture. We'll talk about this a lot in terms of deforestation. And literally, the idea here is pretty simple. You cut down the trees, then you burn them, and what's left behind is the ash and the remains. And that actually fertilizes the soil some. So that now you can move livestock on here. Now you can start to grow crops on here. The problem is, this land is only good for a year or two. And then you've got to cut and burn down another section and move your crop onto that new section. And that'll only be good for a year or two. And then you need a third one. Meanwhile, this first section here will take 100 years to regrow back to what it was like. So you're going to need 50 plots before we can go back to the original one. Not effective use of land. Urbanization itself is a huge issue. As cities get bigger, we require more and more water in order to keep people hydrated and alive. As they get bigger, we require more and more land to cut down, not just for resources, but also for homes, roads, things like that. You can imagine what has happened to all of the plant and animal life that exists in this area. Where has it gone? Nothing good happened. Now, we'll talk a little bit later this week about monocrops and how harmful they are to the environment. But just to summarize it very quickly, a monocrop is where in an entire field you are growing just one type of something, one type of crop, nothing else. The more we build out into nature, particularly with roadways, electrical lines, stuff like that, the more we end up getting wildlife kind of pushing their way in towards our civilized spaces. Climate change is a big one. We'll spend a whole day talking about that. And in order to see some of the effects on climate change, if you take a look at this left picture, that is the dominant plant life throughout the United States, about 30 years ago and earlier than that. You'll see that most of New York was this maple, beech, and birch right here, that red color. Our projected result by the end of this century, in the next 50 years really, is that there will be no more maple, beech, and birch because even a small temperature change is enough that the other plants, namely our oak and hickory here, the darker green, can outcompete them. It can drive them extinct. Plants are fighting each other just like animals are. And with that temperature change, now they have the advantage and they will push the rest of them out. So let's take a look at our first case. I'm going to call these the oopsie cases because oopsie daisy, we made a mistake. And if you remember, I told you guys that we have this scenario where we take a look at something, We believe that we understand it, and so then we plan to interact with it to help nature more. And let's just say things don't tend to work that way. So let's start with the case of forest fires, right? And I mean, forest fires are fires in a forest. And we all understand this idea that fire's bad. And so a forest on fire must be really bad because then all the animals are going to get hurt, the trees are going to get hurt, the forest gets destroyed. So we decided, I will save you, forest. We will save you from the dangers of fire. And so what we did was we started doing what we call forest management. And basically, we took sections like this, where you can see there's a lot of different trees, they're growing in close. We took a look at this scenario and we said, oh, that's not good. They're so close to each other, fire can burn through, so now we're going to manage it. We're going to work and we're going to thin the forest out a little bit. We're going to separate out the trees. We will make it more suitable, not just for ourselves, but also to keep it from burning. Well, there's a problem here. Now, the problem's twofold. First of all, we cut down all those old trees that were starting to rot and fall apart. Now, that means that there's a whole host of animals that live in old, dead trees. That's what they're designed to do, it's part of their habitat. And when you remove those trees, you remove their homes. Now they need to find new homes. They need to go somewhere else or they die. We see that a lot with something like raccoons, where they said, okay, you took my trees, I'm going to take your attic, because they need a new home. But we also had another problem that we did not foresee, and that was the litter on the bottom of a forest. Litter is the stuff that you step on that normally crunches. It's got little twigs, leaves, maybe some larger branches that broken wind, stuff like that that builds up on the bottom. Now, this started to build up year after year out in those deep forests where people don't go. Because every time that a fire started, we immediately got involved because fire bad. And we would drop, you know, bucket loads of water on it to put it out repeatedly. Well, 200 years ago, this is what a forest fire would look like. All right, it's just this little burn layer moving through the forest. Now, an interesting side note, these flames aren't that hot. They're hot enough to burn things, but they're not that hot. They move fairly slow because they're so cool, they can't ignite the stuff right next to them unless they have a little bit of time to get that process going. Here's what forest fires today look like. This was from California last year. We can take a look at places like Australia. All those red dots are areas that were in flames throughout Australia, a little bit of Indonesia, Tasmania down here. You can see, just imagine the scope of that on a single continent. See, here's the problem. Over here on the left hand side, this is the traditional scenario, right? There's a little bit of leaf litter on the ground. The fire burns through, it burns up this little bit and passes by onto the next area with a little bit. So it's that low, relatively cool fire that you see here. The trees, generally speaking, some of them may be killed, but most of them are not because the fire isn't hot enough to really damage them. It'll burn the bark on the outside, but the bark is kind of like our skin. It's designed to take that beating. Well, now, thanks to us putting these fires out, we look at a scenario like this on the right. And there's not just a little bit of burnable material, now there's a lot. And when there's a lot of burnable material, you get forest fires like this. Under normal circumstances, forest fires are incredibly important. It burns away that litter on the bottom. It recycles all that nutrients back into the soil. And then that lets new life start to take over. Those big old rotting trees come down and they provide fertilizer for new young trees to start to grow. We stepped in and decided we could do it better. And we have now found out that we did not do it better. Once again, we saw we saw something in nature, we thought we had a solution to it, and we didn't. Now, this was a pretty minor example of where humans have impacted things. This only affects select forests, rarely, usually, like once every 5 to 10 years. As we go on this week, we're going to be ramping up the severity of the human impacts. So by the end of the week, we're going to be looking at climate change, the biggest, most intense change that this planet is likely to see under our stewardship until we nuke ourselves into oblivion. So, just a quick intro. Just something to kind of go over how we've got involved. Tomorrow, we will have case number two, and case number two is going to be that monoculture idea. And we're going to take a look at not only where is it used now and the ecological impact that that has, but we're also going to take a look at history and where did we see monocultures there, and did that turn out well or did that turn out poorly. So make sure everyone tunes in tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday already. That means that this week is halfway over. Next week is our last 5 day week. Time's going by in a hurry, folks. Stay safe, stay healthy.